Chapter 11. Lucy Westerna's Diary. 12th September.
How good they all are to me. I quite love that dear Dr. von Helsing. I wonder why he was so anxious about these flowers. He positively frightened me, he was so fierce. And yet he must have been right, for I feel comfort from them already. Somehow I do not dread being alone tonight, and I can go to sleep without fear. I shall not mind any flapping outside my window. Oh, the terrible struggle that I have had against sleep so often of late. The pain of the sleeplessness, or the pain of the fear of sleep, with such unknown horrors as it has for me. How blessed are some people whose lives have no fears, no dreads, to whom sleep is a blessing that comes nightly and brings nothing but sweet dreams. Well, here I am tonight, hoping for sleep, and lying like Ophelia in the play, with virgin krantz and maiden strewmeats. I never liked garlic before, but tonight it was delightful. There's a peace in its smell. I feel sleep coming already. Good night, everybody.
Dr. Seward's Diary. 13th September. Called at the Berkeley, and found Van Helsing as usual up to time. The carriage offered from the hotel was waiting. The professor took his bag, which he always brings with him now. Let us be put down exactly. Van Helsing and I arrived at the Hillingham at 8 o'clock. It was a lovely morning, and the bright sunshine and all the fresh feeling of early autumn seemed like a completion of nature's annual work. The leaves were turning to all kinds of beautiful colors, but had not yet begun to drop from the trees. When we met Mrs. Westerna coming out of the morning room. She is always an early riser. She greeted us warmly and said,
"You will be glad to know that Lucy is better. The dear child is still asleep. I looked into her room and saw her, but did not go in, lest I disturb her."
The professor smiled and looked quite jubilant. He rubbed his hands together and said,
"Aha! I thought I had diagnosed the case. My treatment is working."
To which she answered,
"You must not take all the credit to yourself, Doctor. Lucy's state in the morning is in part due to me."
"What do you mean, madam?" asked the professor.
"Well, I was anxious about my dear child last night and went into her room. She was sleeping soundly, so soundly that even my coming did not wake her. But the room was awfully stuffy. There are a lot of those horrible, strong-smelling flowers about everywhere, and she had actually a bunch of them around her neck. I feared that the heavy odor would be too much for her in her dear weak state, so I took them all away and opened the window a bit to let in some fresh air. You will be pleased with her, I am sure."
She moved off to her boudoir, where she usually breakfasts early. As she had spoken, I watched the professor's face, and saw it turn ashen gray. He had been able to retain himself from self-command whilst the poor lady was present, for he knew her state and how mischievous a shock would be to her. He actually smiled on her as he held the door open for her to pass into her room. But the instant she disappeared, he pulled me suddenly and forcibly into the dining room and closed the door. Then, for the first time in my life, I saw Van Helsing break down. After putting his hands before his face, began to sob, with loud, dry sobs that seemed to come from the very racking of his heart. Then he raised his arms again, though appealing for the whole universe. "God, God, God," he said, "what have we done? What has this poor thing done? That we are so beset? Is there fate amongst us still, sent down from the pagan of the old world, that such things be, and in such way? This poor mother, all unknowing, and all for the best of she thinks, does she thing as lose her daughter body and soul, and we must not tell her. We must not even warn her, or she die, and then both die. Or how are we beset? How are the powers of the devils against us?" Suddenly he jumped to his feet. "Come," he said,
Come, we must see an act. Devils or no devils, or all devils at once, it matters not. We fight him all the same.
He went to the door hole for his bag, and together we went up to Lucy's room. Once again I drew up the blind, whilst Van Helsing went towards the bed. This time he did not start as he looked to the poor face, and saw the same awful waxen power as before. He wore stern sadness and infinite pity.
As I expected,
he murmured, with that hissing inspiration of his which meant so much. Without a word he went and locked the door, and then began to set at a little table with the instruments of yet another operation of transfusion of blood. I had long ago recognized the necessity and began to take off my coat, but he stopped me with a warning hand.
No, he said. Today you must operate. I shall provide. You are weakened already.
As he spoke, he took off his coat and rolled up his shirt sleeve. Again the operation, again the narcotic, again some return of color to the ashen cheeks, and the regular breathing of a healthy sleep. This time I watched whilst Van Helsing recruited himself and rested. Presently he took an opportunity to tell Miss Westerna that she must not remove anything from Lucy's room without consulting him, that the flowers were of medicinal value, and that the breathing of their odor was part of the system of care. Then he took over the care of the case himself, saying that he would watch this night, and next he would send me word when to come. After another hour, Lucy waked from her sleep, fresh and bright, and seemingly not so much worse for the terrible ordeal. What does it all mean? I'm beginning to wonder if my long habit of life amongst the insane is beginning to tell upon me on my own brain. Lucy Westerna's diary, September 17th.
4 nights and days of peace. I'm getting so strong again that I hardly know myself. It is as if I had passed through some long nightmare and had just awakened to see a beautiful sunshine and feel the fresh air of the morning around me. I have a dim half-remembrance of long, anxious times of waiting and fearing, darkness in which there is not even a pain of hope to make present distress more poignant, and then long spells of oblivion, and the rising back to the river of life as the diver comes through the great peril of water. Since, however, Dr. Van Helsing has been with me, all this bad dreaming seems to have passed away. The noises that used to frighten me out of my wits, the flapping against the windows, distant voices which seemed to close to me, the harsh sounds that came from I know not where, and commanded me to do I know not what, all have ceased. I go to bed now without fearing any sleep. I do not even try to keep awake. I have grown quite fond of the garlic, and the boxful arrives for me every day from Eileen. Tonight Dr. Van Helsing is going away, and he be has to be for a day in Amsterdam. But I need not be watched, for I am well enough to be left alone. For God's sake, my mother's sake, and dear Arthur's, and for all of our friends who have been so kind, I shall not even feel the change, for last night Dr. Van Helsing asleep in the chair a lot of the time. I found him asleep twice when I awoke, but I did not fear to go to sleep again, although the boughs and bats or something flapped angrily against the window panes.
Pall Mall Gazette, 18th September. The Escaped Wolf. Perilous adventure of our interviewer. Interview with the keeper of the zoological gardens. After many inquiries and almost as many refusals, and perpetually using the words Pall Mall Gazette as a sort of talisman, I managed to find the keeper of the sections of the zoological gardens in which the wolf department is located. Thomas Builder lives in one of the cottages in the enclosure behind the elephant house, and he was sitting down to his tea when I found him. Thomas and his wife are hospitable folk, elderly and without children, and if the specimen I enjoyed of their hospitality be of the average kind, their lives must be pretty comfortable. The keeper would not enter on what he called business until supper was over, and we were all satisfied. Then, when the table was cleared, and he had lit his pipe, he said,
Now, sir,
You can go on and ask me about what you want. You'll excuse me for refusing to talk of professional subjects at before meals. I gives the wolves and the jackals and the hyenas all their section before the tea before I begin to ask them questions. How do you mean ask them questions? I queried, wishing to get them in a talkative humor. Hitting them over the head with the pole is one way, scritching of their ears is another. When gents' flesh wants to show off a bit to gals. I don't so much mind at first, the hitting with the pole before I chucks them the dinner, but I waits till they've had their share in coffee, so to speak, before I tries them with the ear scritching, he added philosophically. It's a deal of the same nature in us as them the animals. Here's you a coming and asking me questions about my business, and I, that grumpy like, only for your bloomin' offering quid. I'd have seen you blowed first before I'd answer. Not even when you asked me a sarcastic like, if you'd like to ask the superintendent if I might ask questions. Without offense, did I tell you to go to hell? You did. And when you said you'd report me for using obscene language and hitting me over the head, but the off squid made out all right. I weren't going to fight, so I waited for food and did as my owl and the wolves and lions and tigers does. But you'll love your art now that old human has chunk of tea cake in me and rinsing me out with a bloomin' old teapot, and I've lit up. You may scratch my ears for all you're worth. You won't even get a growl out of me. Drive along with your questions. I know what's a comin', and that ere escaped wolf. Exactly. What I want to give you is your view of it. Just tell me how it happened. When I know the facts, I'll get you to say what you consider to be the cause of it and how you think the whole affair will end. All right, Governor. This is about the whole story. That there wolf, what we called Brasica, was one of 3 gray ones that came out of nowhere to Jarmuch, which we brought off him 4 years ago. He was a nice, well-behaved wolf that never gave no trouble to walk of. I'm more surprised than him wait to get out than any more animal in this place. But there, you can't trust wolves no more than raw women. Don't you mind him, sir? Broke in Mrs. Tom with a cheery laugh. He's got minding the animals so long that bless him, he ain't an old wolf himself. But there ain't no harm in him. Well, sir, it was about 2 hours after feeding yesterday when I first heard any disturbance. I was making up a litter for the monkey house for a young puma which is ill. But when I heard the yelping and howling, I came straight away. There was old Berserker tearing like a mad thing at the bars as if he wanted to get out. There wasn't much people about that day, and close at hand was only one man, tall, thin chap with a hooked nose and a pointed beard, with a few white hairs running through. He had odd, cold-looking, red eyes. I took him some misliking, for it seemed as if he was him that was irritated at. He had white kid gloves on his hands and pointed out like the animals to be. And he says, Keeper, these wolves seem upset about something. Well, maybe it's you, says I, for I did not like the airs that he gave himself. He didn't get angry, but I hoped he would, and kind of smiled an insolent smile, with a mouth full of white teeth. Oh, no, they wouldn't like me, he says. Oh, yes, they would, I says, imitating him. They always lacks a bone or two to clean their teeth out after tea time, which you has a bag full. Well, it is an odd thing, but when the animals see us talking, they lay down, and I went over to Berserker, and he let me stroke his ears, same as ever. That there man caring nowhere, and bless, but if he didn't put his hand and stroke the old wolf's ears too. Take care, says I. Berserker is quick. Never mind, he says. I'm used to them. Are you in the business yourself? I says, taking off my hat for a man who trades wolves and as a assessor is a good friend to keepers. No, he says. Not exactly in the business, but I have made a few pets of several.
And with that, he lifts his parallel to the Lord and walks away. Oh, Berserker kept looking at him till he was out of sight, and then went and lay down in the corner and wouldn't come out till old evening. Well, last night, as soon as the moon was up, the wolves were all howling, and there weren't nothing for them to howl at. There weren't no one near, not except someone that was eventually a calling the dog somewheres back in the gardens in the park road. Once or twice I went out to see what all right it was, and then the howling stopped just before 12 o'clock, and I took a look around before turning in and bust me. But when I went to opposite old Berserker's cage, I seen the rails broken and twisted about, and the cage empty. That's all I know for certain.
Did anyone else see anything?
One of our gardeners was a coming around about that time and saw Army. He sees a big old gray dog running coming through the garden edges. At least so he says. But I don't give much for it myself, for he never did say a word about anything to Mrs. and me when he got home. And it was only after the escape of the wolf it was made known. We've been up all night hunting for the park with Berserker, and he was remembered seeing anything. My old belief is that Harmony had got it in his head.
Now, Mr. Boulder, can you account for any way the escape of the wolf?
Well, sir, he said, in a suspicious sort of modesty, I think I can, but I don't know as how you'd be satisfied with the theory.
Certainly I shall. If a man like you, who knows the animals from experience, can't hazard a good guess at any rate, who's to even try?
Well then, sir, I accounts for it this way. It seems to me that this here wolf escaped simply because he wanted to get out.
From the hearty way that both Thomas and his wife laughed at the joke, I could see that it was done service before, and that a whole explanation was simply an elaborate sell. I couldn't cope with bandages with the worthy Thomas, but I thought I would sure a way to find his heart to say so. Now, Mr. Builder, we'll consider that first half-sovereigner worked off, and his brother is waiting to be claimed when you've told me what you think will happen.
Right, yeah, sir, he said briskly. You'll excuse me, I know, for chaffing of ye, but the old woman here winked at me, which was as much as telling me to go on. Well, I never, said the old lady. My opinion is this. There wolf is hiding off somewheres. The gardener what didn't remember he was said galloping forward faster than a horse could go. And I don't believe him, for you see, sir, wolves don't gallop no more than dog does. They're not being built that way. Wolves is a fine thing in a storybook, and I just say that when they gets in the packs and does some shivering, something that's more feared than they is, and they make the devil of a noise and chop it up, whatever it is. But Lord bless you, in real life a wolf is only a low creature, not half so clever or bold as a good dog, and not a quarter as much fight in it. This one ain't been used to fighting or even prowling for himself, and more like he's found someone around the park hiding and shivering of. And if he thinks at all, wondering where he is going to get his breakfast from, or maybe he's got down some area where he's gotten the coal cellar, my, won't some cook get a rum start when he sees his green eyes a shining at her out of the dark. If he can't get a food, he's bound to look for it, and mayhaps he might chance in the light of the butcher's shop sometime. If he doesn't, some nursemaid goes walking off with the soldier and leaving off the infant with the permulator. Well, then I shouldn't be surprised if the census is one baby the less.
I was handing him the half-sovereign when something came bobbing up against the window, and Mr. Builder's face doubled its natural length in surprise.
God bless me, he said, if it ain't old Berserker come back to himself.
He went to the door and opened it. A most unnecessary proceeding seemed to me. I've always thought a wild animal never looks so well as when some obstacle as pronounced durability is between us. My personal experience has intensified rather than diminished that idea. After all, however, there's nothing like custom, for neither Builder nor his wife thought any more than a wolf than I should a dog. The animal itself was peaceful and well behaved as the father of all picture wolves, Red Riding Hood's quondam friend, while seeking her confidence in masquerade. The whole scene was an unutterable mixture of comedy and pathos. The wicked wolf that for half a day had paralyzed London and set all children in town shivering in their shoes was there in a sort of penitent mood, and was received and petted like all sort of lupine prodigal son. Old Builder examined him all over and with most tender solicitude, and when he finished with his penance said, "There, I knew the poor old chap would get into some kind of trouble. Didn't I say all along? Here's a head all cut and full of broken glass. He's been a-getting over some bloomin' wall or some other. It's a shame that people are allowed to top their walls with broken bottles. And here's what comes of it. Come along, Berserker." He took the wolf and locked him in a cage, with a piece of meat that satisfied, in quantity at any rate, the elementary conditions of a fatted calf, and went on to report. I came off too to report only the exclusive information that was given today regarding the strange escapade at the zoo. Dr. Seward's Diary, 17th September. I was engaged after dinner in my study posting up books, which, through press of other works and many visits of Lucy, had fallen sadly into arrear. Suddenly the door was burst open, and in rushed my patient, with his face distorted with passion. I was thunderstruck for such a thing as a patient getting of my own accord into the superintendent's study and almost unknown. Without an instant's pause, he made straight at me. He had a dinner knife in his hand, and as I saw he was dangerous, I tried to keep the table between us. He was too quick and too strong for me, however, for before I could get my balance, he had struck me and cut my left wrist rather severely. Before he could strike again, however, I got in my right, and he was sprawling on the back on the floor. My wrist bled freely, and quite a little pool trickled onto the carpet. I saw that my friend was not intent on further effort, and occupied himself in binding up my wrist, keeping a wary eye on the prostrate figure all the time. When the attendants rushed in and we turned our attention to him, his employment positively sickened me. He was lying on his belly on the floor, licking up like a dog the blood which had fallen from my wounded wrist. He was easily secured, and, to my surprise, went with the attendants quite placidly, simply repeating over and over again, "The blood is alive! The blood is alive!" I cannot afford to lose blood just at present. I have lost too much of my own as late for my physical good, and then the prolonged strain of Lucy's illness and the horrible phases is telling on me. I am overexcited and weary, and I need to rest, rest, rest. Happily, Van Helsing has not summoned me, so I need not forego my sleep. Tonight I could not well do without it. Telegram, Van Helsing, Antwerp, to Seward, Colfax. Sent to Colfax, Sussex, as no county given. Delivered late by 22 hours. 17th September. Do not fail to be at Hillingham tonight. If not watching all the time, frequent visit, and see that the flowers are all placed. Very important. Do not fail. Shall be with you as soon as possible afterward. Dr. Seward's Diary, 18th September. Just off for train to London, the arrival of Van Helsing's telegram filled me with dismay. A whole night lost, and I know by bitter experience what may happen in a night. Of course, it is possible that all may be well, but what may have happened? Surely there is some horrible doom hanging over us that every possible accident should thwart us in all we try to do. I shall take the cylinder with me, and then I can complete my entry on Lucy's phonograph. Memorandum left by Lucy Westerna. 17th September, night. I write this and leave it to be seen, so that no one may by any chance get into any trouble through me. This is an exact record of what took place tonight. I feel I am dying of weakness, and I can barely strength to write, but it must be done if I die in the doing. I went to bed as usual,
taking care that the flowers were placed as Dr. Van Helsing had directed, and soon fell asleep. I was awakened by flapping at the window, which had begun after the sleepwalking on the cliff of Whitby, when Mina saved me, and which now I know so well. I was not afraid, but I did wish that Dr. Stewart was in the next room, as Dr. Van Helsing said he would, so that I might have called him. I tried to sleep, but could not. Then there came to me an old fear of sleep, and I determined to stay awake. Perversely, sleep would try to come when I did not want it, as I feared to be alone. I opened my door and called out, "Is anybody there?" But there was no answer. I was afraid to wake Mother, so I closed the door again. Then outside in the shrubbery I heard a sort of howl like a dog's, but more forceful and deeper. I went to the window and looked out, but could see nothing except a big bat, which had evidently been buffeting its wings against my window. So I went back to bed, but determined not to go to sleep. Presently the door opened, and my mother looked in. Seeing by my moving that I was not asleep, came in and sat by me. She said to me even more sweetly and softly than her wont, "I was uneasy about you, darling, and came in to see that you were all right." I feared she might catch cold sitting here, and I asked her to come in and sleep next to me. So she came into bed and lay down next to me. She did not take off her dressing gown, for she said she would only stay a while and then go back to her own bed. As she lay there in my arms, and I with hers, the flapping and buffeting came to the window again. She was startled and a little frightened, and cried out, "What is that?" I tried to pacify her, and at last succeeded, and she lay quiet, but I could hear her poor dear heart still beating terribly. After a while there was a low howl again in the shrubbery, and shortly after there was a crash at the window, and a lot of broken glass was hurled on the floor. The window blind blew back with the wind as it rushed in. In the aperture of the broken panes there was the head of a great, gaunt, grey wolf. Mother cried out in fright and struggled up in a sitting position, and clutched wildly at anything that would help her. Amongst other things she clutched were the wreath of flowers that Dr. Van Helsing insisted on my wearing around my neck, and tore it away from me. For a second or two she sat up, pointed at the wolf. There was a strange and horrible gurgling at her throat. Then she fell over, as if struck with lightning, and hit her head on my forehead, and made me dizzy for a moment or two. The room and all around seemed to spin. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, but the wolf drew his head back, and a whole myriad of little specks come blowing through the broken window and wheeling and circling around like a pillar of dust that travelers describe when there's a monsoon in the desert. I tried to stir, but there was some spell upon me, and Mother's poor body, she seemed to grow cold already, for her dear heart had ceased to beat, weighed me down, and I remembered no more for a while. Time did not seem long, but very, very awful, till I recovered consciousness again. Somewhere near, a passing bell was tolling. The dogs all around the neighborhood were howling, and in our shrubbery, seemingly just outside, a nightingale was singing. I was dazed and stupid with pain and terror and weakness, but the sound of the nightingale seemed like the voice of my dead mother come back to comfort me. The sound seemed to have awakened the maids too, for I could hear their bare feet pattering outside my door. I called to them, and they came in, and when they saw what happened and what was lay over me in the bed, they screamed out. The wind rushed in through the broken window, and the door slammed. They lifted the body of my poor dead mother and laid her, covered up with a sheet, on the bed after I got up. They were all so frightened and nervous that I directed them to go to the dining room, and each have a glass of wine. The door flew open for an instant and closed again. The maid shrieked, and then went in a body to the dining room, and I laid the flowers I had on my dear mother's breast. When they lay there, I remembered what Dr. Van Helsing had told me, but I didn't like to remove them, and besides, I would have had some of the servants to sit up with me now. I was surprised that the maids did not come back. I called to them, but got no answer, so I went to the dining room to look for them. My heart sank when I saw what had happened. They all four lay helpless on the floor, breathing heavily. The decanter of sherry was on the table half full. There was a queer, acrid smell about. I was suspicious, and I examined the decanter. It smelled of laudanum, and looking on the sideboard I found the bottle which Mother's doctor uses for her. Oh, did use... It was empty. What am I to do? What am I to do? I'm back in my room with Mother. I cannot leave her, and am I alone save for the sleeping servants whom someone has drugged? Alone with Dad, I dare not go out, for I can hear the low howl of the wolf through the broken window. The air seems full of specks, floating and circling in the draught like the window. The light burns blue and dim. What am I to do? God, shield me from the harm of this night. I shall hide this paper in my breast where they shall find it when they come to lay me out. My dear mother gone. It is time that I go too. Goodbye, dear Arthur. If I should not survive this night, God keep you, dear, and God keep me.
Chapter 12. Dr. Seward's Diary. 18th September. I drove at once to Hillingham and arrived early, keeping my cab at the gates. I went up the avenue alone. I knocked gently and rang as quietly as I could, for I feared to disturb Lucy or her mother, and hoped to bring only a servant to the door. After a while, finding no response, I knocked and rang again. Still no answer. I cursed the laziness of the servants that they should lie abed at such an hour, for it was now 10 o'clock. So I rang and knocked again, but more impatiently, and still without response. Hitherto I blamed only the servants, but now a terrible fear began to assail me. Was this desolation but another link in the chain of doom which seemed drawing tight around us? Was it indeed a house of death to which I had come too late? I knew that minutes, even seconds, of delay might mean hours of danger to Lucy. If she had had again one of those dreadful relapses, and I went around the house to try if I could by any chance find entry elsewhere. I could find no means of ingress. Every window and door was fastened and locked, but I returned half to the porch. As I did so, I heard the rapid pit-pat of swiftly driven horses' feet. They stopped at the gate, and a few seconds later I met Van Helsing running up the avenue. When he saw me, he gasped out,
Then it was you, and just arrived. How is she? Am I too late? Did you not get my telegram?
I answered as quickly and coherently as I could that I had only got his telegram early in the morning, and had lost not a minute in coming here, and that I could not make any one in the house hear me. I paused and raised his hat as he said solemnly,
Then I fear we are too late. God's will be done.
With his usual recuperative energy, he went on,
Come, if there's no way to get in, we must make one. Time is all, and all is to us now.
We went around to the back of the house, where there was a kitchen window. The professor took a small surgical saw from his case, and handing it to me, pointed the iron bars which guarded the window. I attacked them at once, and had very soon cut through 3 of them. Then, with a long, thin knife, we pushed back the fastening of the sashes, and opened the window. I helped the professor in, and followed him. There was no one in the kitchen, or in the servants' rooms, which were close at hand. We tried all the rooms, and went along. And in the dining room, dimly lit by the rays of the light of the shutters, we found 4 servant women lying on the floor. There was no need to think them dead, for their strenuous breathing and acrid smell of laudanum in the room left no doubt as to their condition. Van Helsing and I looked at each other, and as we moved away,
We can attend to them later.
Then we ascended to Lucy's room. For an instant or two we were paused at the door to listen. But there was no sound that we could hear. With white faces and trembling hands, we opened the door gently and entered the room. How shall we describe what we saw? On the bed lay two women, Lucy and her mother. The latter lay farthest in, and she is covered with a white sheet, the edge of which had been blown back by the draught through the window, showing the drawn white face, with a look of terror fixed upon it. By her side lay Lucy, with white face and still more drawn. The flowers which had been around her neck were found upon her mother's bosom, and her throat was bare, showing the two little wounds which we had noticed before, but looking horribly white and mangled. Without a word, the professor bent over the bed. His head almost touched poor Lucy's breast. Then he gave a quick turn of his head, as of one who listens, and leaping to his feet, he cried out,
"It is not too late yet. Quick, quick, bring the brandy."
I flew downstairs and returned with it, taking care to smell and taste it, lest it too were drugged like the decanter of sherry which was found on the table. The maids were still breathing, but more restlessly, and I fancied that the narcotic was wearing off. I did not stay to make sure, but returned to Van Helsing. He rubbed the brandy, as on another occasion, on her lips and gums, and on her wrists and palms of her hands, and said to me,
"I can do this, all that can be at present. You go and wake the maids. Flick them each in the face with a wet towel, and flick them hard. Make them get heat and fire and warmth and a warm bath. This poor soul is nearly as cold as that beside her. She will need to be heated before we can do anything more."
I went at once, and found little difficulty in waking three of the women. The fourth was only a young girl, and the drug had evidently affected her more strongly. So I lifted her on the sofa and let her sleep. The others were dazed at first, but when the remembrance came back to them, they cried and sobbed in a hysterical manner. I was stern with them, however, and would not let them talk. I told them that one life was bad enough to lose, and if they delayed they would sacrifice Miss Lucy. So, sobbing and crying, they went about their way, half clad as they were, and prepared fire and water. Fortunately, the kitchen and boiler fires were still alive, so there was no lack of hot water. We got a bath and carried Lucy out as we placed her in it. Whilst we were busy chafing her limbs, there was a knock at the hall door. One of the maids ran off and hurried on and put some clothes on and opened it. When she returned to us, there was a gentleman who had come with a message from Mr. Holmwood. I bade her simply tell him that he must wait, for we could see no one now. She went away with the message, and engrossed with her work, I clean forgot about him. I never saw in all my experience a professor work in such deadly earnest. I knew, as he knew, that it was a stand-up fight with death, and in a pause told him so. He answered me in a way that I did not understand, but with the sternest look in his face he could wear.
"If that were all, I would stop here where we are now, and let her fade away into peace, for I see no light in life over her horizon."
He went on with his work, if possible, renewed with frenzied vigor. Presently we both began to be conscious of the heat beginning to have some effect. Lucy's heart beat a trifle more audibly to the stethoscope. Her lungs had a perceptible movement. Van Helsing's face almost beamed as we lifted her from the bath and rolled her in a hot sheet to dry her. And he said to me,
"The first gain is ours. Check to the king."
We took Lucy into another room, which had been prepared, and laid her in bed and forced a few drops of brandy down her throat. I noticed that Van Helsing tied a soft silk handkerchief around her throat. She was still unconscious, and was quite as bad as, if not worse than, we had ever seen her. Van Helsing called in one of the women and told her to stay and not take her eyes off her until we returned. Then he beckoned me out of the room.
"We must consult as to what is to be done,"
he said as we descended the stairs. In the hall he opened the dining-room door, and we passed in and closed the door carefully behind him. The shutters had been opened, but the blinds were already down, with that obedience to the etiquettes of death which the British women of the lower classes always rigidly observe. The room was, therefore, dimly dark. It was, however, light enough for our purposes. Van Helsing's sternness was somewhat relieved by the look of perplexity. He was evidently torturing his mind about something, so I waited for an instant, then he spoke.
What are we to do now? Where are we to turn for help? We must have another transfusion of blood, and soon, or that poor girl's life won't be worth an hour's purchase. You are exhausted already, and I am exhausted too. I fear to trust those women, even if they would have courage to submit. What are we to do for someone who will open his veins for her?
What's the matter with me, anyhow? The voice came from the sofa across the room, and the tones brought relief and joy to my heart, for those were those of Quincy Morris. Van Helsing started angrily at the first sound, but his face softened. A glad look came to his eyes as he cried out, "Quincy Morris!" and he rushed towards him with outstretched hands.
"What has brought you here?" I cried as our hands met.
"I guess the heart is his cause." He handed me a telegram. "Have not heard from Seward for 3 days, and am terribly anxious. Cannot leave. Father still in same condition. Send word to me how Lucy is. Do not delay. Homewood." I think I've come just in the nick of time. You know you two have to tell me what to do. Van Helsing strode forward and took his hand, looking straight in the eyes as he said,
"A brave man's blood is the best thing on earth when a woman is in trouble. You're a man, and no mistake. Well, the devil may work against us for all he's worth, but God sends us men when we want them."
Once again we went through the ghastly operation. I have not the heart to go through the details. Lucy got a terrible shock, and it told her even more than before, though plenty of blood went into her veins, and her body did not respond to the treatment as well as on the other occasions. Her struggle back to life was something frightful to see and hear. However, the action of both hearts and lungs improved, and Van Helsing made a subsequent injection of morphia, as before, with good effect. Her faint became a profound slumber. The professor watched whilst I went downstairs with Quincy, and sent some of the maids to pay off one of the cabmen who were waiting. I left Quincy lying down after having a glass of wine, and told the cook to get ready with a good breakfast. Then a thought struck me. I went back to the room where Lucy was now. When I came softly in, I found Van Helsing with a sheet or two of notepaper in hand. He had evidently read it, and was thinking it over when he sat down his hand with his brow. There was a look of grim satisfaction in his face, as of one who had his doubt solved. He handed me the paper, saying only,
"It dropped from Lucy's breast when we carried her to the bath."
When I read it, I stood looking at the professor, and after a pause, asked him, "God's name, what does it all mean? Was she, or is she mad? Or what sort of horrible danger is it?" I was so bewildered that I did not know what to say more. Van Helsing put out his hand and took the paper, saying,
"Do not trouble yourself about it now. Forget it for the present. You shall know and understand it all in good time, but it will be later. And now, what is it that you came to me to say?"
It brought me back to the fact that I was all myself again. "I came to speak about the certificate of death. If we do not act properly and wisely, there may be an inquest. That paper would have had to have been produced. I am in hopes that we need no inquests, for if we had it surely would kill poor Lucy, if nothing else. I know, and you know, and the other doctor who attended her knows, that Mrs. Westerna had a disease of the heart, and we can certify that she died of it. Let us fill up the certificate at once, and I shall take it myself to the registrar and go on to the undertaker."
"Good, oh my friend John, well thought of. Truly Miss Lucy, if she be sad in the foes that beset her, is at least happy in her friends that love her. 1, 2, 3, all open their veins for her, besides one old man. And yes, I know, friend John, I am not blind. I love you all more for it. Now go."
In the hall I met Quincy Morris, with a telegram for Arthur telling him that Mrs. Westerna was dead, that Lucy had also been ill, and that was going to be better. And that Van Helsing and I were with her. I told him where I was going, and he hurried me out. But I was going, said, "When you come back, Jack, may I have 2 words with you and ourselves?" I nodded in reply and went out. I found no difficulty about the registration and arranged for the local undertaker to come up that evening and measure her for a coffin and make arrangements. When I got back, Quincy was waiting for me. I told him I would see him as soon as I knew about Lucy and went up to her room. She was still sleeping, and the professor seemingly had not moved from his seat at her side. From putting his finger to his lips, I gathered that he expected her not to wake before long, and was afraid of her stalling nature. So I went down to Quincy and took him into the breakfast room where the blinds were not drawn down, and which was a little more cheerful or less cheerless than the other rooms. When we were alone, he said to me, "Jack Seward, I don't want to shove myself in anywhere where I've got no right to be, but this is no ordinary case. You know I loved that girl and wanted to marry her, but although that's all past and gone, I can't help but feeling anxious about her all the same. What is it that's wrong with her? The Dutchman, and a fine old fellow he is, I can see that, said, the time you two came into the room that you must have another transfusion of blood, and that both of you were exhausted. And now I know how well you medical men speak in camera, and that a man must not expect to know what the consult about in private. But this is no common matter, and whatever it is, I have done my part. Is that not so?" "That's so," I said, and he went on. "I take it that both you and Van Helsing have already done what I did today. Is that not so?" "That's so. And I guess Art was in on it too. When I saw him 4 days ago down at his own place, he looked rather queer. I have not seen anything pulled down that quick since I was on the Pampas, and had a mare that I was fond of go to the grass all in the night. One of those big bats they call vampires had got in her at night, and, what with his gorge and the vein left open, there wasn't enough blood in her to let her stand up, and I had to put a bullet through her as she lay. Jack, if you tell me without betraying confidence that Arthur was the first, is that not so?" As he spoke, the poor fellow looked terribly anxious. He was in torture of suspense regarding the woman he loved, but his utter ignorance of the terrible mystery which seemed to surround her intensified his pain. His very heart was bleeding, and it took all the manhood in him, and there was a royal lot of it, too, to keep him from breaking down. I paused before answering, for I felt that I must not betray anything which the professor wished to keep secret, but already knew so much, and guessed so much, that there could be no reason for not answering. So I answered in the same phrase, "That's so." "And how long has this been going on?" "About 10 days." 10 days? Then I guess, Jack Seward, that poor pretty creature that we all love had put into her veins within the time of blood of 4 strong men. Man alive, her whole body wouldn't hold it." Then coming close to me, he spoke in a fierce half-whisper. "What took it out?" I shook my head. "That," I said, "is the crux. Van Helsing is simply frantic about it, and I'm at wit's end. I can't even hazard a guess. There's been a series of little circumstances which have thrown out all calculations to Lucy improperly watched, but all these shall not occur again. Here we stay until all well, or ill." Quincy held out his hand. "Count me in," he said. "You and the Dutchman will tell me what to do, and I'll do it." When she broke late in the evening, Lucy's first movement was to feel at her breast, and, to my surprise, produce the paper which Van Helsing had given me to read. Careful Professor had replaced it where it had come from, lest not waking she should be alarmed. Rather than lit on Van Helsing and me too, I'm glad. Then she looked around the room, and seeing where she was, shuddered. She gave a loud cry and put the poor thin hands before her pale face. We both understood what that meant, that she had realized the full of her mother's death. So we tried what we could to comfort her. Doubtless sympathy eased her somewhat, but she was very low in thought and spirit, and wept silently and weakly for a very long time. We told her that either or both of us would now remain with her at all times, and that seemed to comfort her. Towards dusk, she fell into a doze. Here a very odd thing occurred. While still asleep, she took the paper from her breast and tore it in two. Van Helsing stepped over and took the pieces from her. All the same, however, she went with the action of tearing, as though the material were still in her hands. Finally, she lifted her hands and opened them as though scattering the fragments. Van Helsing seemed surprised, and his brows gathered as if in thought, but said nothing. 19th of September. All last night she slept fitfully, but always afraid to sleep. Something weaker when she woke from it. The professor and I took it in turns to watch, and we never left her for a moment unattended. Quincy Moore said nothing about his intention, but I knew that all night long he patrolled around and around the house. When day came, its searching light showed the ravages of poor Lucy's strength. She was hardly able to turn her head, and the little nourishments which she could take in seemed to do her no good. At times she slept, and both Van Helsing and I noticed a difference in her, between sleeping and waking. While she slept, she looked stronger, although more haggard, and her breathing was softer. Her mouth opened and showed pale gums drawn back from her teeth, and thus looked positively longer and sharper than usual. When she woke from the softness, her eyes evidently changed to expression, for she looked her own self, although a dying one. In the afternoon, she asked for Arthur, and we telegraphed for him. Quincy went off to meet him at the station. When he arrived, it was nearly 6 o'clock, and the sun was setting full and warm. The red glow streamed through the window and gave more color to the pale cheeks. When he saw her, Arthur was simply choking with emotion, and none of us could speak. In the hours that passed, the fits of sleep and the comatose condition that passed for it had grown more frequently, so that she passes the conversation was possible were shortened. Arthur's presence, however, seemed to act as a stimulant. She rallied a little and spoke to him more brightly than she had done since we arrived. He, too, pulled himself together, and spoke as cheerily as he could, so the best was made of everything. It was now nearly 1 o'clock, and he and Van Helsing were sitting with her. I am to relieve them in a quarter of an hour, and I am entering Lucy's phonograph. Until 6 o'clock, there to try to rest. I fear that tomorrow will end our watching, for the shock has been too great. Poor child could not rally. God help us all. Letter. Mina Harker to Lucy Westerina. Unopened by her. 17th September.
My dearest Lucy, it seems an age since I heard from you, or indeed since I wrote. You will pardon me, I know, for all my faults when you have read all my budgets of news. Well, I got my husband back all right. When we arrived at Exeter, there was a carriage waiting for us, and in it, though he had an attack of gout, Mr. Hawkins. He took us back to his own house, where there were rooms for us all nice and comfortable, and we dined together. After dinner, Mr. Hawkins asked, "My dears, I want to drink to your health and prosperity, and every blessing attends you both. I know you both from children, and have, with love and pride, seen you grow up. Now I want to make your home here with me. I have left to me neither chick nor child. All are gone, and in my will, I have left you everything." I cried. Dear Lucy, as Jonathan and the old man clasped hands, our evening was very, very happy one. So here we are, installed in this beautiful old house, and from both my bedroom and the drawing room I can see the great elms of the cathedral close, with their great black stems standing out against the old yellow stone of the cathedral, and I hear the rooks overhead cawing and chattering and gossiping all day, after the manner of rooks. and humans. I am busy, I need not tell you, arranging things in housekeeping. Jonathan and Mr. Hawkins are busy all day, for now that Jonathan is a partner, Mr. Hawkins wants to tell him about all the clients. How is your dear mother doing on? I wish I could run up to town for a day and see you. But I dare not go yet. With so much on my shoulders, and Jonathan wants looking after still. He is beginning to put some flesh on his bones again, but he was terribly weakened by the long illness. Even now he sometimes starts out of his sleep in a sudden way and awakes all trembling, till I can coax him back to his usual placidity. However, thank God, these occasions grow less frequent as the days go on, and they will in time pass away altogether, I trust. And now I have told you my news. Let me ask yours. When are you to be married, and where? And who is to perform the ceremony? And what are you to wear? And is it to be public or a private wedding? Tell me all about it, dear. Tell me all about everything, for there is nothing which interests you which will not be dear to me. Jonathan asked me to send his respectful duty, but I do not think that is good enough for the junior partner of an important firm of Hawkins and Harker. And so, as you love me, and he loves you, and I love you with all the moods and tenses of the verb, I send you simply his love instead. Goodbye, my dearest Lucy, and all blessings on you. Yours, Mina Harker.
Report from Patrick Hennessy, MD, MRCS, LKQ, CPI, etc., etc., to John Stewart, MD. 20 September. My dear sir, in accordance with your wishes, I enclose a report of the conditions of everything left in my charge. With regard to patient Renfield, there is more to say. He has had another outbreak, which might have had a dreadful ending, but which, as it fortunately happened, was attended with an unhappy results. This afternoon, a carrier's cart with 2 men made a call at the empty house for grounds about on yours, the house to which, you will remember, a patient twice ran away. The men stopped at our gate to ask the porter their way, as they were strangers. I was myself looking out of the study window, having a smoke after dinner, and saw one of them come up to the house. As he passed the window of Renfield's room, the patient began to rate himself from within, and called him all foul names he could lay his tongue on. The man, who seemed a decent enough fellow, contented himself by telling him to shut up for a foul-mouthed beggar, whereupon our man accused him of robbing him and wanting to murder, and said that he would hinder him if he were to swing for it. And I opened the window and signed to the man not to notice, and he contented himself after looking the place over and making his mind as to what kind of place he had gotten, saying by, Lord bless you, sir, I wouldn't mind what he said to me if it weren't a bloomin' madhouse. I pity you and the governor for having to live in the house next to a wild beast like that. Then he asked the way civilly enough, and I told him where the gate to the empty house was. He went away, followed by threats and curses of revelings of our man. I went down to see if I could make out any cause for his anger, since he is usually such a well-behaved man, and except his violent fits, nothing of the kind had ever occurred. I found him, to my astonishment, quite composed and most genial in his manner. I tried to get him to talk of the incident, but he blandly asked me questions as to what I meant, and led me to believe that he was completely oblivious of the affair. It was, I am sorry to say, however, only another instance of his cunning, for within half an hour I heard of him again. This time he had broken out through the window of his own room, and was running down the avenue. I called to the attendants to follow me, and ran after him, for I feared that he was intent on some mischief. My fear was justified when I saw the same cart which had passed before coming down the road, having on it some great wooden boxes. The men were wiping their foreheads, and were flushed in the face, as if some violent exercise. Before I could get up to him, the patient rushed at them, and pulling one of them off the cart, he began to knock his head against the ground. If I had not seized him just at the moment, I believe he would have killed the man then and there. The other fellow jumped up and struck him over the head with the blunted end of his heavy whip. It was a terrible blow, but he did not seem to mind it, but seized him also, and strangled him with the three of us, pulling us to him to and fro as if we were kittens. You know I am no lightweight, and the others were both burly men. At first he was silent in his fighting, but as we began to master him, and the attendants were putting their straitjacket on him, he began to shout.
I'll frustrate them. They shan't rob me. They shan't murder me by inches. I'll fight for my lord and master.
And all sorts of similar incoherent ravings. It was very considerable difficulty that they got him back to the house and put him in the padded room. One of the attendants, Hardy, had a broken finger. However, I set it all right, and he is going on well. The two carriers were at first loud in their threats and actions for damages, and promised to rain all the penalties of the law on us. Their threats were, however, mingled with a sort of indirect apology for defeating of the two of them with a feeble madman. They said that if it had not been the way of their strength had been spent in carrying the heavy boxes, the cart, that they would have made short work of him. They gave another reason for their defeats, the extraordinary state of drought to which they had been reduced by the dusty nature of their occupation, and the reprehensible distance from the scene of their labours of any place public entertainment. I quite understood their drift, and made a stiff glass of grog, or other more of the same, and with each a sovereign in hand, they made light of the attack, and swore that they would encounter a worse madman any day for the pleasure of meeting a bloomin' good bloke as your correspondent. I took their names and their addresses, in case they might be needed. They are as follows: Jack Smollett, of Dudding's Rents, King George's Road, Great Walsworth, and Thomas Snelling, Peter Parley's Row, Great Guide Court, Ronald Green. They are both in the employment of Harrison Sons, Moving and Shipping Company, Orange Masters Yard, Soho. I shall report to you any manner of interest occurring here, and shall wire you at once if there anything importance happens. Believe me, sir, yours faithfully, Patrick Hennessy. Letter, Mina Harker to Lucy Westerina, unopened by her. 18th September.
My dearest Lucy, such a sad blow has befallen us. Mr. Hawkins has died very suddenly. Some may not think it so sad for us, but we both had come to so love him that it really seems as though we had lost a father. I never knew either father or mother, so that the dear old man's death is a real blow to me. Jonathan is greatly distressed. It is not only that he feels sorrow, deep sorrow, for the dear, good man who has befriended him all of his life, and now at the end has treated him as if his own son, and left him a fortune which to people of our modest bringing up wealth beyond dream of avarice. But Jonathan feels it on another account. He says the amount of responsibility which it puts on him makes him nervous. He begins to doubt himself. I try to cheer him up, and my belief in him helps him to have a belief in himself. But it is here that the grave shock that he expels tells upon him the most. Oh, it is too hard that sweet, simple, noble, strong nature such as his, a nature so enabled him by our dear good friend's aid to rise from clerk to master in a few years, should be so injured that the very essence of its strength is gone. Forgive me, dear, if I worry you with my troubles in the midst of your own happiness. But, Lucy dear, I must tell someone. For the strain of keeping up a brave and cheerful appearance to Jonathan tries me, and I have no one here that I can confide in. I dread coming up to London, as we must do on the day after tomorrow, for more of Mr. Hawkins' will left that he is to be buried in the grave with his father. As there are no relations at all, Jonathan will have to be chief mourner. I shall try to run over to see you, dearest, if only for a few minutes. Forgive my trouble, you. With your blessings, your loving, Mina Harker.
Dr. Seward's Diary, 20th September. Only resolution and habit can make me let me make an entry tonight. I am too miserable, too low-spirited, too sick of the world and all in it, including life itself, that I would not care if I heard this moment the flapping of wings of the angel of death. And he has been flapping those wings to some purpose of late. Lucy's mother and Arthur's father, and now, let me get on with my work. I relieved Van Helsing of his watch over Lucy. We wanted Arthur to go rest also, but he refused at first. It was only when I told him that we should want him to help us during the day, that we must not all break down for the want of rest, lest Lucy should suffer, that he agreed to go. Van Helsing was very kind to him. "Come, my child," he said. "Come with me. You are sick and weak, and have much more sorrow and much mental pain, as well as attacks of your strength, that we know of. You must not be alone, for to be alone is to be full of fears and alarms. Come to the drawing-room, where there is a big fire, and there are 2 sofas. You shall lie on one, and I on the other, and our sympathy will be comfort to each other, even though we do not speak, and even if we sleep." Arthur went off with them, and casting back a longing look at Lucy's face, which lay on her pillow, almost wider than the lawn. She lay quite still, and I looked round the room to see all was as it should be. I could see the professor had carried about the room, as in the others, his purpose of using the garlic. The whole room, window sashes reeked with it, and around Lucy's neck, over the silk handkerchief which Van Helsing made her keep on, was a rough chaplet of the same odorous flowers. Lucy was breathing somewhat seriously. Her face was at all its worst, where the open mouth showed the pale gums. Her teeth, in the dim, uncertain light, seemed longer and sharper than they had been in the morning. In particular, by some trick of the light, the canine teeth looked longer and sharper than the rest. I sat down by her, and presently she moved uneasily. At the same moment, there was a sort of dull flapping or buffeting at the window. I went over to it softly and peeped out by the corner of the blind. There was a full moonlight, and I could see that the noise was made by a great bat which wheeled around, doubtless attracted by the light, although so dim, and every now and again it struck the window with its wings. When I came back to my seat, I found that Lucy had slightly moved, and had torn away the garlic flowers from her throat. I replaced them as well as I could, and I sat watching her. Presently she woke, and I gave her food, as Van Helsing had prescribed. She took but a little, and that languidly. There did not seem to be with her now the unconscious struggle for life and strength that hitherto so marked her illness. It struck me as curious that the moment she became conscious she pressed the garlic flowers close to her. It was certainly odd that whenever she got into that lethargic state with the strenuous breathing, she put the flowers from her, but that when she waked she clutched them close. There was no possibility of making that mistake from about this, for in the long hours that followed she had many spells of sleeping and waking, and repeated both actions many times. At 6 o'clock Van Helsing came to relieve me. Arthur had then fallen into a doze, and he mercifully let him sleep on. When he saw that Lucy's face, I could hear the hissing and draw of his breath, and he said to me in a sharp whisper, "Drop the blind, I want the light." Then he bent down, and his face almost touched Lucy's, examining her carefully. He removed the flowers and lifted the silk handkerchief from her throat. As he did so, he started back. I could hear his ejaculation, "Mein Gott!" as it smothered in his throat. When I bent over and looked too, I noticed some queer chill came over me. The wounds on the throat had absolutely disappeared. For fully 5 minutes, Van Helsing stood looking at her, with his face at its sternest. Then he turned to me and said calmly, "She is dying. It will not be long now. It will be much different, mark me, whether she dies conscious or in her sleep. Wake the poor boy and let him come and see the last. He trusts me, and we have promised him." I went to the dining room and waked him. He was dazed for a moment, but when he saw the sunlight streaming through the edges of the shutters, he thought he was late and expressed his fear. I assured him that Lucy was still asleep, but told him gently as I could that both Van Helsing and I feared that the end was near. He covered his face with his hands and slid down on his knees by the sofa, where he remained perhaps a minute, with his head buried, praying, whilst his shoulders shook with grief. I took him by the hand and raised him up. "Come," I said, "my dear old fellow. Summon all your fortitude. It will be best and easiest for her." When we came into Lucy's room, I could see that Van Helsing had, with his usual forethought, been putting matters straight and making everything look as pleasing as possible. He had even brushed Lucy's hair, so that it lay on the pillow in its shiny ripples. When we came into the room, she opened her eyes, and seeing him, whispered softly,
"Arthur, oh my love, I am so glad to see you have come."
He was stooped to kiss her when Van Helsing motioned him back. "No," he whispered, "not yet. Hold her hand. It will comfort her more." So Arthur took her hand and knelt beside her, and she looked her best, with all the soft lines matching the angelic beauty of her eyes. Then gradually her eyes closed, and she sank to sleep. For a little bit her breast heaved softly, as her breath came and went like a tired child. Then intensely there came a strange change which I had noticed in the night. Her breathing grew stertorous, her mouth opened, and the pale gums drawn back made the teeth look longer and sharper than before. In a sort of sleep-waking, vague, unconscious way she opened her eyes, which were now dull and hard at once, said in a soft, voluptuous tone, such as I had never heard from her lips,
"Arthur, my love, I am so glad you have come. Kiss me."
Arthur bent eagerly over to kiss her, but in that instant Van Helsing, who, like me, had been startled by her voice, swooped upon him and, catching him by the neck with both hands, dragged him back away with a fury and strength which I had never thought he could have possessed, and actually hurled him almost across the room. "Not for your life," he said. "Not for your living soul and hers." And he stood between them like a lion at bay. Arthur was so taken aback that he did not for a moment know what to do or say, and before any impulse of violence could seize him he realized the place and the occasion. He stood silent, waiting. I kept my eyes fixed on Lucy, as did Van Helsing, and we saw a spasm as if rage flit like a shadow over her face. The sharp teeth clamped together, then her eyes closed, and she breathed heavily. Very shortly after, she opened her eyes with all their softness, and putting out her poor, pale, thin hand, took Van Helsing's great brown one, drawing it to her, and she kissed it.
"My true friend,"
she said in a faint voice, but with untellable pathos.
"my true friend and his. Oh, guard him and give him peace."
"I swear it," he said solemnly, kneeling beside her, holding up his hand as one who registers an oath. Then he turned to Arthur and said to him, "Come, my child, take her hand in yours and kiss her on the forehead, and only once." Their eyes met instead of their lips, and so they parted. Lucy's eyes closed, and Van Helsing, who had been watching closely, took Arthur's arm and drew him away. Then Lucy's breathing became stertorous again, and all at once it ceased.
"It is all over,"
said Van Helsing.
"She is dead."
I took Arthur by the arm and led him away to the drawing room, where he sat down and covered his face with his hands, sobbing in a way that nearly broke me down to see. I went back to the room and found Van Helsing looking at poor Lucy, and his face was sterner than ever. Some change had come over her body. Death had given back part of her beauty, for her brow and cheeks now recovered some of their flowing lines. Even the lips had lost their deadly pallor. It was as if the blood no longer needed for the working of the heart had gone to make the harshness of death as little rude as it might be. We thought her dying while she slept, and sleeping when she died. I stood beside Van Helsing and said, well, poor girl, there is peace for her at last. It is the end. He turned to me and said with a grave solemnity,
"Not so. Alas, not so. 'Tis only the beginning."
When I asked him what he meant, he only shook his head and answered,
"We can do nothing as yet. Wait and see."